Some staff members over at CNN have expressed the company's coverage of the Israel siege on Gaza amounts to journalistic malpractice. One staffer said, quote, "The majority of news since the war began, regardless of how accurate the initial reporting, has been skewed by a systemic and institutional bias within the network toward Israel."
According to 6 CNN staffers, as well as internal memos and emails, daily news decisions are shaped by directives from the CNN headquarters in Atlanta, setting strict guidelines on coverage. Additionally, every story on the war must be greenlit by the Jerusalem Bureau before it's published or makes air. Now, as quoted in The Guardian, some at CNN fear that its coverage of the latest Gaza war is damaging a reputation built up by its reporting of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which led to a surge in viewers. But others say that the Ukraine war may be part of the problem because editorial standards grew lax as the network and many of its journalists identified clearly with one side, Ukraine, particularly at the beginning of the conflict. Now, one CNN journalist described a schism within the network, reminiscent of the times following 9/11, per The Guardian.
Now, this comes as Belgium summoned Israel's ambassador on Friday to condemn the bombing of the Belgian Development Agency in Gaza. Brussels said the offices were destroyed in northern Gaza. The Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs wrote in a tweet, "Targeting civilian buildings is unacceptable." Per the Times of Israel, there were reportedly no employees in the building at the time of the bombing. The IDF has said it's looking into Belgium's claims. Meanwhile, Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA, said he will stay in his post for as long as possible, defying Israeli demands for his resignation following allegations that members of his Gaza staff took part in Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. Per the Financial Times, Lazzarini said, "Are we paying the price for having been vocal in drawing attention about the plight of the people in Gaza of this humanitarian disaster unfolding on our watch? Maybe this might have contributed to accelerate or amplify the criticism."
Well, meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson is set to put a $17.6 billion standalone Israel aid bill on the floor this week. So there will be a vote on Israeli aid separate from anything else, border, Ukraine, etc.
So I just want to be really clear about the posture of what's being argued about the Belgian building that's been bombed. The allegation is that because Belgium did not agree to withdraw its funding from UNRWA the way that the United States and 9 of its allies did after the Israeli accusations that we now know four of the 30,000 people who work at UNRWA were accused of being involved in October 7th. Because Belgium did not withdraw its funding from UNRWA, it subsequently, it's arguing, had its aid building, its civilian building in Gaza bombed by Israel. Now, that is the contention, but it's a very bold, going from speculation to outright contention from people at that agency is a pretty incredible charge to make, and suggest that the tensions here are really boiling over between humanitarian aid workers and people across the international community, and the impunity with which Israel seems to be getting away with what in other contexts would definitely be considered to be war crimes and violations of international protocol.
Sure. As I said last week, I certainly support ending the funding of UNRWA, but there should be an investigation here. They shouldn't blow up the Belgian building. They shouldn't retaliate for Belgium not wanting to take that step. It seems very fishy. And moreover,
than the broader claim here with Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of UNRWA, is he's now coming out and saying, well, is UNRWA being retaliated against, right? Are these charges being raised on the exact same day, mere hours after the ICJ opinion came down 2 Fridays ago, precisely because the International Court of Justice relied on so much testimony from humanitarian aid workers in Gaza? You can appreciate what other sources really are as proximate to what's been going on in Gaza for the last decades and decades. And that, are they basically being are they enacting revenge? Is Israel enacting revenge? Is the international community, the United States and its allies, enacting revenge on UNRWA, the aid organization, for providing the testimony that allowed the ICJ to come to the determination that there is a plausible charge against Israel of genocide? And is that the way the international community is operating now? That you're going to bomb buildings and defund aid organizations on which 2 million of the 2.3 million people who live in Gaza rely on for food as there's an impending famine, where Gazans are currently eating grass to survive. Is that the kind of ally we want to have, and the kind of government that we want to support?
Yeah, I think anyone should be able to send aid money if they want to, but it's not the U.S. government's responsibility to use our taxpayer dollars for that purpose or for the purposes of funding Israel. Now, I was happy to see Representative Thomas Massie, who's probably closest to my views on this subject, on foreign policy, announced on Twitter, on X, that he was going to vote against the Israeli aid. He wrote, "Israel has a lower debt to GDP ratio than the United States. This spending package has no offset, so it will just increase our debt by the amount of money spent on it." Why does a wealthy country, we have all these financial problems, all sorts of policy issues. Why do we have to pay for a wealthy country with fewer debt problems than we have for their defense? It doesn't make any sense. So we're funding the bombing, and then we're funding the humanitarian, or we were until we paused funding to UNRWA. We're funding the humanitarian. It's like we blow up a bridge and then we pay to rebuild it. Why are we doing this? I think many Americans would have a lot of questions about the waste of money that goes into paying for a war and then paying for fixing the problems created by the war. Is this making us more secure? There's no evidence it's making us safer. In fact, there's a lot of evidence it's probably making U.S. forces deployed all over the world for various reasons, for reasons that don't quite sit with our Constitution, frankly, coming under assault, in danger because of what's going on. It doesn't seem like a good use of money, and I was glad to see Massie say he's going to vote against it, and that got him called an anti-Semite by John Podhoretz, the editorial director of Commentary, even though he has Massie has a consistent opposition to this kind of aid funding to any country. It's not specific to Israel. A very unfair charge.
Yeah, I saw someone do the math, and it was something like $200 if you, this is not how it works, obviously, but if you were to distribute out the aid that is being allocated for Israel across the American public, it would amount to something like $250 per American citizen at a time when, as I say often on this show and elsewhere, the average American can't come up with $400. 50% of Americans can't come up with $400 for an emergency, medical emergency, bailing your loved one out of prison, whatever the emergency is. And that really puts it into scale. And when you see the reaction to Thomas Massie saying, I'm not going to vote for this, when you see someone like, a kind of esteemed columnist say, no, of course you're a disingenuous piece of anti-Semitic filth, it really lets you know what the climate of pushback is, and how stigmatized having a political position other than I unconditionally endorse Israel and unlimited aid to Israel really is in the United States of America.
And I'm going to send your money there. And you can support what they're doing. You can say that they should be doing this and vocally support them, but it is not the obligation. American taxpayers are not obligated to contribute their hard-earned money for this effort.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning also your point about the danger that troops overseas are facing precisely because of the escalation in Gaza. It is one you cannot emphasize enough. I was listening to an interview on Intercepted actually this morning, and the guest was explaining how frequently when there are attacks against American troops in the Middle East, they are described by the attackers as attacks on Israel. Israel and the United States of America are seen as one entity, and the actions of Israel are blamed on the United States, rightly or wrongly, and vice versa. And as we often talk about on this show, it is difficult to forget. I don't think we should forget that in the Why I Did It explanation for 9/11, the oppression of Palestinians was the prime justification for that terror attack. So what does that mean about the long-term safety of both our troops stationed overseas and Americans here at home?
We will continue to follow developments in the Middle East, and we'll have more Rising right after this.